Hello and welcome back to the dividend wave. Today I'll be looking at Q1 21 earnings of AbbVie and some of the metrics in the strategic objectives of the company. So just a quick look back. We know that AbbVie was the result of a spin-off from Abbott in 2013, and in 2015 it did its first major acquisition with Pharmacyclics for roughly 21 billion. This was still in the biopharma space, and it brought as the major drug Imbruvica. Now, in 2020, in May, the company made the acquisition of Allergan for 64 billion, and here it was a wide diversification with into aesthetics and bringing in Botox as the leading brand. So now looking at earnings for Q1, we see that revenue came in 50% higher, and this is actually the result of the combined AbbVie and Allergan businesses. Looking at net earnings, that came in at 18% higher, but taking into account that there was a share dilution due to the fact that AbbVie had to issue more shares to fund the Allergan business, and we have now 20% more shares. And looking at that GAAP metric of EPS, we actually had a decline of 1.5%. But that is due to a few factors that we will look at in a second. And if we just use the metric of the adjusted diluted EPS, actually that came in at a much healthier 22%, which I believe is a better depiction of how the business is running now. So if we look at the GAAP to non-GAAP earnings, we see that the biggest impact is coming from this intangible asset amortization, and this is due still to the combination of the Allergan and AbbVie business. The other big impact here is the change in fair value of contingent consideration, and this most likely comes from Skyrizi. We have to wait for the 10Q to come out to look at the detail of this. But looking at the 10K, we see that this item has been appearing on the earnings and the balance sheet of AbbVie. And at least in the 10K, it was due to better expectation in terms of future sales for Skyrizi. And in Q4, there was a charge of 4.7 billion for this line item. So now the important AbbVie strategic objectives that were published in the 10K, there are 6, but also the ones that align with the things I look at when analyzing AbbVie is how well Skyrizi and Rinvoq are selling. So the growth of these two immunology drugs will be very important to replace Humira in the future. And the other one, obviously, it concerns Humira itself. And here is looking at how well it's still growing in the US, where it will start experiencing competition as of next year, and looking at the international business where it's already experiencing competition since 2018. So Skyrizi and Rinvoq for Q1, really strong sales for both drugs. And Skyrizi with a 91% increase from the same quarter a year ago, and Rinvoq delivering 252% increased revenue. Now, quick word on Humira here. It continues to grow still, 3.5% more versus a year ago, but it's clearly a tale of two cities. Internationally, losing sales to biosimilar competition, and the US domestically still growing with a healthy 6.9% increase. Now, quickly looking at this graph, what we can see is that for the full year of 2020, both drugs are actually selling 1.6 billion and 0.7 respectively. And if we look and compare with Humira at the same stage of the life cycle of that drug in 2003 and 2004, is that these drugs are either better or almost comparable to it, which is a testament to how well AbbVie has been rolling out these two drugs. Now, from the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference earlier this year, we know that these two drugs are expected to sell around 7 and 8 billion respectively by 2025. So very interesting growth rates here, and hopefully these are the drugs that will start replacing Humira's revenue once it starts experiencing competition in the US as well. Now looking at Humira, what we see is that in terms of weight, the peak of this drug on total sales of AbbVie was in 2017, where 65% of all revenue was coming from this one drug. Now we see that over time it started to come slightly down due to other acquisitions and AbbVie's own pipeline. But where we see really a big drop in the weight has been since the Allergan acquisition. And this becomes even more important as Humira loses exclusivity in the US as of next year. And where we can see where probably part of the sales in the US are going is reflected already in the international sales. We see internationally Humira has been having competition since Q4 18, and what we see is that the first quarters after the exclusivity ended were quite painful, with losses in the range of 30% year on year. Now, what we are seeing is that it has been stabilizing more in the high single digits. So this is clearly, as we've seen, one of the strategic objectives of AbbVie. But one concerning point from the report of Q1 was that actually on a comparable operational basis, we were looking more towards double digits, so 12.6 as reported, which is slightly concerning. So it may mean that it's re-accelerating these losses on Humira. So a solid Q1, and I'm happy with the progress on the main metrics that I follow. Looking at AbbVie, the share price today hit a 52-week high above $114. It's currently yielding around 4.3%, which is still quite strong in this market. And the company is still growing quite strongly their dividend with a 19% increase over the last 3 years. Now, one metric where it seems to be overvalued is on the price to earnings, looking at the trailing 12 months. But as we will see in a second, this is suffering from the same things as we've seen during last Q4 and Q1. So looking at the full year 2021 outlook, the company expects a GAAP EPS of 7.27. But actually, if we look at the non-GAAP or the adjusted one, it's 12.37. So we see that the same things that have been hitting earnings during Q1 and Q4, these intangible asset amortizations and the contingent considerations due to Skyrizi, are actually impacting and making this big difference between GAAP and non-GAAP. So if I were to take the share price and divide it by this non-GAAP EPS, we would see that we are in a forward-looking PE of roughly 9.25, which would put it actually, interestingly, from way overvalued to potentially very undervalued. I'm holding AbbVie. I still think the company is executing really well against their strategic objectives. I'm happy to hold it. Potentially looking to add if we see a little bit of a pullback. Just mentally, it would be good not to buy it at 52-week high, but if it happens, it happens. So I would be happy to still buy it. I hope you enjoyed it, this quick review. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Thank you.